want to share some key thoughts that really stood out to me concerning this book. And if you are interested, you can actually listen to the whole book on YouTube, and I will leave a link. The author of this book, Raymond Franz, was not only a member of the Governor body, but his uncle was actually the president of the Watchtower Tract Society at one time. Now, here are my key thoughts. 1, his conscience. The whole reason why he wrote this book, because he was at the top of the organization as part of the Governor body. His uncle was the president, but he realized that what was said from the Watchtower was not the reality that he saw day to day. And thus his conscience bothered him so much, he knew he needed to do something. Another key thought, the Governor body. Did you realize that the bulk of material that was written by the writing department was basically one man? And then he would simply go to the president, show it to him, and in most cases, it would be approved, maybe another person, but never was the Governor body as a whole would look at a particular doctrinal statement and give their approval or disapproval of. They mainly dealt with disciplinary actions, which they did a lot of. And in fact, they did so much of that, they themselves did not even have time to actually study the scriptures. But the reality is, according to the scriptures, it's not the Watchtower that's God's truth for today, because the Bible has already determined that. It is the ministry gifts spoken of in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 14. That is so out of context with the Bible. Here's another one, the problem with sex. The Watchtower, in many instances, would actually ask different couples about every sexual act that they did. Talk about intruding into your personal life. What's even more startling is that women that knew that their husbands were unfaithful could not get divorced for one particular reason. It didn't matter what he did with another woman, another man, animal. None of that mattered. If it did not include intercourse, she could not get divorced. What I was surprised is the author, he didn't even get married until he was 36, which is a shame. And that's why he never had children, because he was so focused on doing the work of the Watchtower and all the failed predictions that he wasn't able to even have a family. Concerning military service, every young man was required by law in Mexico to serve for a certain period of time in the military. This totally went against the Watchtower's guidelines. However, what they did is allow the young men to basically give a bribe to an official, and that official would sign a paper saying that they have completed their military service, even if they never even stepped foot on military grounds. And you might say, okay, so what's the big deal? Well, you go into other African nations, they were not given the same leeway, but many of them were put in prison. Many of them were tortured because they would not do as the military had requested them. So in Mexico, they can pay a bribe, get it out of the way, according to conscience, as they would say. Yet in other countries like Malawi, they would be put in prison, and sometimes for years, and have torturous conditions to live in. The big one that most people really focus in on is failed prophecies. I mean, back in the 1800s to 1914, 1925, and probably the most notable day is 1975, in which people sold their homes, their businesses. They didn't even have children, or they gave up their jobs only to be devastated by this so-called God's channel of truth. But why does God's channel of truth can't simply get certain things right again and again and again and again? Hey, even a clock is right twice a day, yet the Jehovah's Witnesses could not even do that. And finally, Romans chapter 8 is the final nail in the coffin. See, every Jehovah's Witness claims to be a witness for Jehovah, and thus they belong to him. Yet honestly, consider this text from Romans chapter 8, verse 9. But ye are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if so be that the Spirit of God dwell in you. Now, if any man have not the Spirit of Christ, he is none of his. The Bible is very clear that if one does not have the Spirit of Christ, then that person does not belong to him. If that person does not belong to him, then they cannot be a true witness for Jehovah. For to be a witness for Jehovah, one would have to be one of his.